Not only did the lost city of Atlantis actually exist, but its true location has been hiding in plain sight for thousands of years, completely unnoticed, as we've been looking in all the wrong places for its location, since everyone assumes that it must be under the ocean somewhere, such as in the depths of the Atlantic Ocean or the Mediterranean Sea, which have long been considered to be the most likely places for its existence. And no, I am not about to suggest that Antarctica is the hidden location of Atlantis either. Because in this video, I'm going to use the exact words that Plato used to describe Atlantis, its location, and the geographical land features that surround it, which were recorded in Plato's dialogues, the Critias and the Timaeus. And many people are not even aware that the information contained in Plato's writings of Atlantis actually originate from the ancient Egyptians. And the details that Plato shared of Atlantis, which I'm about to share with you in a side-by-side comparison, will show you that the Rakart structure located in Mauritania, Africa, also commonly referred to as the Eye of the Sahara or the Eye of Africa, which most people have never even heard of, by the way, is the most likely location for the lost city of Atlantis, as it matches so many precise details of what Plato wrote. But it must first be mentioned that according to mainstream academics and historians, the legend of Atlantis is simply fictional and has been commonly referred to as a myth or even pseudo-history, which completely contradicts Plato and Solon, which described an empire referred to as Atlantis, which was known for being technologically advanced, with noble and powerful people possessing vast wealth, luxury, and knowledge, and even military superiority, and is described as being destroyed in a single day and night of misfortune, which caused the island of Atlantis to disappear into the depths of the sea, related to a massive earthquake and likely a tsunami. So first things first, Plato received all the information about Atlantis from Solon, who was his ancestral relative separated by 6 generations. Solon was born in Athens, Greece some 2,600 years ago, and was an Athenian statesman, lawmaker, and poet, remembered particularly for his efforts to legislate against political corruption and economic and social decline in Athens. He was known to be a person of wisdom and outstanding character. In Solon's later years, he traveled to Egypt in the search of knowledge, and Egypt at that time had the longest documented historical records available. And he visited Neith's temple at Sais, where he learned of the history of Atlantis from a high Egyptian priest who translated the hieroglyphs that were carved into stone within the temple, which also described that Egypt was once a colony of the Empire of Atlantis. And Neith's temple no longer exists today, as it was destroyed long ago when it was consumed by what is now the Nile Delta swamplands. However, thanks to Solon's detailed notes, the information was retained and kept for 6 generations within Plato's family, before it was published by Plato himself in the Critias and the Timaeus dialogues approximately 2,400 years ago. So one of the first things to point out is the supposed date of Atlantis' destruction according to what Solon had learned while visiting Egypt, which was that the event that destroyed the lost city had occurred 9,000 years earlier, which is a very interesting time frame, considering that Solon visited Egypt 2,600 years ago. And 9,000 years plus 2,600 years equates to 11,600 years before present time today, which just so happens to coincide with the Younger Dryas climate catastrophe, which of course I've discussed in many other videos. Long story short, to anyone that's not familiar or new to the channel, there was a massive change in global temperatures, sea levels fluctuated, a massive extinction event of 75% of mammals in North America occurred. There's even evidence of global fires said to have been larger than the ones that occurred during the extinction event that killed off the dinosaurs, scorching at least 10% of the Earth's land surface. The evidence for this event is scientifically overwhelming and is likely related to a fragmented comet. And the point is that it's very likely that this event is related in some way to the destruction of Atlantis. And for more details, I highly recommend you look into the brilliant work of Randall Carlson and Graham Hancock. But what are the odds that this date of 11,600 years ago would match so perfectly? And that's not the only thing that matches up so closely. Most notably, Atlantis was said to be made up of concentric circles, 3 rings of water and 2 of land. In fact, here are Plato's exact words. There were alternate zones of sea and land, larger and smaller, encircling one another. There were 2 of land and 3 of water, which were turned as if with a lathe, each having its circumference equidistant every way from the center. And here you can see a few animated examples of what people have created based off of Plato's description of Atlantis. Now, compare this to the Ricart structure. Just look at this. The first thing that you must understand when you see this is that this is far larger than it looks. For example, this photo right here was taken from high altitude, and what you're seeing is something around 20 miles across, or 32 kilometers. And this particular photo does not even show the entire structure, which is approximately 30 miles or 48 kilometers across. And this site can really only be appreciated from space and satellite imagery, as it covers a vast area. In fact, the Ricart structure wasn't even discovered until the Gemini 4 mission in 1965, and is now a common landmark utilized by astronauts. This thing was hiding in plain sight for thousands of years, but when you look at photos of it from the ground, you have no idea what you're looking at. Only from the sky can you understand that you are part of this massive structure containing circles within circles. And in this example, you can see one of the outer rings in the distance, yet from the ground it just looks like a hill. It's remarkable at just how much it does resemble an eye, and it makes perfect sense as to why it was given the nickname of the Eye of the Sahara and the Eye of Africa. And by the way, it is located approximately 250 miles or 400 kilometers inland off the coast of West Africa in a very remote area which is rarely visited and again unknown to most people. What's even more fascinating than its size and shape is that scientists do not know what it is or how it was formed, although they do think that it is natural, and it was first theorized to have been an impact site from a meteor, but that was ruled out as there is no evidence of an impact. In fact, scientists have never seen anything like this anywhere else throughout the entire world. Their number one guess is that it was probably formed around 100 million years ago as the supercontinent Pangaea was ripped apart by plate tectonics in what is now Africa and South America. They theorize that molten rock was pushed upwards towards the surface but never made it all the way through, thus creating a dome of rock layers. And they suggest that at some point around 100 million years ago, the eye of the structure erupted, collapsing the bubble which makes up the center part of the structure, and erosion did the rest of the work to create what you see today, which is clearly heavily eroded. But this, of course, is all speculation, as it cannot be proven, and again, we've never seen anything like this anywhere else throughout the world. But here's where things start to get really interesting. It just so happens that the diameter of its outer circle is approximately 23.5 kilometers, or 14.5 miles, which is basically equivalent to the size and dimensions provided by Plato when converting from stadia to modern measurements. For example, the circular island of Atlantis was described as being 127 stadia. Well, one stadia is 607 feet, and 607 feet times 127 stadia is 77,089 feet. Convert that measurement, and that is 23.5 kilometers. I measured this numerous times on Google Earth, and I got anywhere from 21 kilometers to 24 kilometers. Most of my measurements were 22 kilometers in diameter, and again, this is virtually identical to Plato's and Solon's documentation. And although my own measurements through Google Earth cannot be considered exact, it is unbelievably close. So where we're at so far is that the Ricart structure matches Plato's description of having 3 circles of water and 2 of land, which is what you would see at the Ricart based off its design if there were water flowing into it. And not only that, the diameter of the outer circles matches the size described by Plato within a very small margin, if not identical. But this next detail that Plato describes is extremely interesting. He stated, and quote, "The mountains of the island of Atlantis was celebrated for their number and size and beauty," adding that the surrounding mountains of the city flowed with rivers, and this part of the island looked toward the south and was sheltered from the north. So he is stating that the mountains were on the north side, sheltering the city to the south, which is exactly what you see at the Ricart, and the mountains are on the north side. But not only that, when you look at detailed satellite photography, you can see the evidence of multiple rivers that were spilling over the side of the mountains towards Atlantis. Can you imagine what this place looked like when it wasn't so dry? Just like Plato stated, the mountains of the island of Atlantis were celebrated for their number and size and beauty. And it's a shame that the Ricart is so remote and visited so rarely, as there are so few pictures available of the view of these mountains when standing at ground level. But I can just imagine that these mountains were lush and beautiful green with rivers and waterfalls pouring over these mountains. And The rivers were clearly there, we can see that, so it's certain that this place once looked much differently than the barren, dry desert that we see today. And this clearly matches Plato's description, and it becomes even more compelling when you consider that Plato stated that the city of Atlantis opened up to the sea at the south. Well, look at these photos, where you can see that there is an opening at the south of the Rakart structure. So if there was once water here, and if it neighbored the sea, this would further match Plato's description. I mean, doesn't this match what a waterway outlet would look like? And not only that, doesn't the entire region look like it was blasted by flowing water or a tsunami? You can see the striations in the land going from west to east from the ocean. Tell me that this doesn't look like a massive wave or a steady flow of water completely altered the terrain. And it's also worth mentioning that scientists have emphasized that the Rakart is heavily eroded, which the circular walls clearly show us. Now, consider Plato's exact words in regards to the aftermath of the cataclysm. Quote, "Atlantis is part of the Atlantic which is no longer accessible by ship. Atlantis, when sunk by the earthquake, became an impassable barrier of mud to voyagers sailing from hence to any part of the ocean. In other words, it became landlocked." Again, if this is the site of Atlantis, and if the details shared by Solon and Plato are true, and if the Rakart structure was the site of Atlantis, then it's not hard to see that perhaps a lot of sand or mud was pushed into Africa from the ocean during some sort of catastrophic event. And let's not forget the key detail that he mentioned regarding that the area surrounding Atlantis was a level plain which was smooth and even. Is this not another match when compared to the Rakart? Because here you can see multiple views and angles of it. And Plato said that Atlantis was sheltered by mountains to the north that were facing the south, and that the south part of Atlantis opened to the sea. So isn't that what we're seeing here, assuming that the ocean was once much further inland? And something else we should consider is that the sands of the Sahara actually originate from the sea, an interesting fact that many people are not aware of. And just to give you a comparison of just how massive this region is, compare it to the size of the United States. Perhaps the remnants of Atlantis are now under the Sahara Desert. Now here is another geological detail that matches Plato's description. He stated, quote, "The stone which they quarried was white, another black, and a third red," going on to say that the main city was constructed with red, black, and white rocks. This region just so happens to have endless amounts of loose rock which match these colors, particularly black and red, but we also see lighter colors mixed in with them as well. And real quick, what you're looking at are a few screenshots from an outstanding documentary titled Visiting Atlantis, which was filmed in 2011 by George S. Alexander and Natalice Rosen. And this documentary was the inspiration for my video, and I highly recommend you visit their website, visitingatlantis.com, for more details. And in fact, this video is currently only available on the Gaia Network. That documentary goes on to point out that the center island of the Rakart has fresh spring water that flows from it. And this here is a not so great screenshot from that documentary where the locals dug a well to prove that fresh spring water flowed from the center island of the Rakart, despite the fact that the underground water in the surrounding area is all salt water, which is interesting considering that this is 250 miles from the ocean. Perhaps further evidence that this site once met the sea. This detail about the fresh spring water coming out of the center island is significant when you compare it to what Plato said. Quote, "The god Poseidon found no difficulty in making special arrangements for the center island, bringing up two springs of water from beneath the earth, one of warm water, the other of cold. And he also specifically stated that a well near the central Acropolis provided the city with fresh water." So let's take a second to consider all the details regarding the Eye of the Sahara and Plato's description of Atlantis. First, Atlantis was said to have been destroyed 11,600 years ago, coinciding precisely with the Younger Dryas climate catastrophe. It's a circular structure that would have been made up of 3 rings of water and 2 of land, which would be the case at the Rakart if it had water in it. It has a diameter of 23.5 kilometers, which matches Plato's description of it. There are mountains to the north, which also have evidence of rivers flowing over them, just as Plato described. The entire area is surrounded by a vast plain. The south opened up to the sea, which again, if the sea were further inland, it would match the description. And if there was a tsunami that cut Atlantis off from the ocean with mud, as Plato described, then you can see in the satellite imagery how this would be possible. The center island also had fresh spring water, just as described by Plato, and despite the fact that the surrounding area has salt water underground. And the region also has black, red, and lighter color rocks. And there are other details described by Plato that I haven't even mentioned, such as that there were a great number of elephants on the island. And the documentary Visiting Atlantis pointed out that many skeletal remains of elephants have been found in the area and are even depicted on ancient rock art in the area as well. And there are other details to support that there was once a civilization there. For example, the discovered artifacts of tools and gold jewelry. And this is very interesting considering that the Ricard structure is in a remote area of the Western Sahara. But it's not just that. Plato described that Atlantis had an abundance of copper and gold. Well, Mauritania today, their #1 exports are iron, copper, and gold. Now obviously, when you consider everything that Plato said about it, the Ricard structure is a very compelling case that must be considered. However, there is one significant detail which would exclude this site as a possible location of Atlantis, and that is its elevation being 1,300 feet above sea level. And even though the Earth's sea levels were some 400 feet higher during the height of the last ice age, that is still a considerable gap. That is unless the geography of the region was much different and the land was pushed up due to the movement of plate tectonics, which, let's not forget, the theory proposed by scientists as to the formation of the Ricard structure was that it was, quote, uplifted by molten rock that was pushed towards the surface from underneath. So consider Antarctica as an example in that the bedrock that sits below the continent laying underneath the ice is rising. And this is occurring at a very slow rate, and I am not suggesting that this is exactly what happened to the Ricard structure. I'm simply pointing out that we should consider that some plate movement may happen much quicker under certain situations that we are not yet familiar with. I mean, we were shocked to learn that the 2011 Japanese earthquake and tsunami moved the coast of mainland Japan by 8 feet in a matter of moments, and even shifted the Earth's axis. So we must consider that we don't even know what the Ricard structure is or how it was actually formed, and considering that it is so unusual, we must open our minds to new possibilities. If the Ricard structure is indeed Atlantis, then we have to ask ourselves whether this unusual land feature is natural or could it be man-made? Is it possible that what we're looking at is a man-made creation, or perhaps could it be a combination? A very unusual land feature that humans took over and modified to be an oasis for a civilization. You want to hear another fascinating detail? So the legend of Atlantis states that it was an empire made up of 10 kingdoms, and the island of Atlantis was the capital. And the god Poseidon gave birth to 5 sets of twins, so 10 children, and each one of those children went on to rule each one of those 10 kingdoms. So allegedly, Poseidon had 5 sets of twins. Does anyone want to guess what part of the world has the highest birth rate of twins per capita? Nigeria. That is one interesting fact considering its geographical proximity to Mauritania and the Ricard structure. So although we cannot say with absolute certainty that Atlantis actually existed or that the Ricard structure would be the location of it, it obviously has some very compelling and specific similarities to Solon's and Plato's description. And like I mentioned earlier, according to the experts, Atlantis is just a fictional story that Plato made up to encourage better behavior among governments and its citizens. And modern academics are saying that the story of Atlantis must be false. Yet Plato and Solon were known for their brilliance of mind and strength of character. And this is the only example, at least that I'm aware of, where they were ever accused of lying about something. And the Egyptian description of Atlantis at the Temple of Neith in Sais, Egypt, no longer exists today, although perhaps those stones could be found underneath the Nile River somewhere, but it did exist for several hundred years, possibly a millennia. And I'm having difficulty finding an exact date on the temple's destruction by the Nile River, but it was long after Solon and Plato had died. So why would Solon and Plato lie about something that could be verified back then, as it was common for people to travel to Egypt, and the temple still existed at that time? And by the way, I have to point out something really interesting and, well, honestly a bit disturbing, which is that if you go to the Wikipedia page of the Ricard structure, you will not find one single word about Atlantis. And when you go to the Atlantis page on Wikipedia, you will not find one single word about the Ricard structure either. In fact, if you go to the page related to various hypotheses for the location of Atlantis, you will not find one single word related to the Ricard structure or the Eye of Africa. Nothing. And guess what else? Wiki has locked their page on Atlantis only allowing certain unknown individuals the capability of editing the page, but whoever created it certainly made sure to mention the words pseudo-history in the first few sentences for all to see. So there is actually a lot more information to share about what Plato stated about Atlantis, and I was going to share it all in this one video, but this is getting so long, so now I'm going to make a part 2, which will probably be my next video as I already have all the information put together. I may wait, and if some new headline makes the news, I might make that video first, but be expecting that very soon because there are so many details to share about the people of Atlantis and specifics about the kingdom itself, which you will find fascinating because these details haven't really been shared and you wouldn't know about it unless you go looking for the information yourself. So with all this said, I guess I'll close it up there, but leave a comment and share your thoughts on all of this and definitely hit the like button and subscribe, but I'll leave it at that. I'm Jimmy, this is Bright Insight, and I have many more videos to come on a whole wide variety of topics. Take care, everybody.